Our main topic is the end of the Reformation, the militant phase of the Reformation, and our main question is, how does this lead us closer to the modern state, modern government, modern state, modern powers? So we talked about the French Wars of Religion. We talked about Protestants with three major religious groups. What were they? We have the Catholics, right? We have Protestants, but we have, and these are the only ones that we're really talking about now. There are other types of Christians, but then there are two types of Protestants that we're really looking at. What are the two Protestants? What? Yeah, Calvinists and Lutheran. Which one is more radical? Calvinists are more radical. People don't like them as much who are Catholics and that sort of thing. Lutherans are, less incendiary. So let's talk about this power shift. The 30 Years' War starts for one reason, and by the time it's over, the reason it started is completely irrelevant. It starts as a local religious war in Bohemia and ends as an international war that has to do nothing with religion, has to do with state power. And we think that because of what happened during the war. When we have a religious war, we usually have one religion against another. By the end of it, your religious affiliation doesn't matter. So that's why we say it started religious and it ended secular. And so what really happened with the 30 Years' War, big picture, is it moved Europe closer to the secular state. But it did it a certain way. Remember, one of our biggest powers is Spain right now. They own a lot of different land throughout Europe. They actually control a big part of Belgium. Here we go, the Spanish Netherlands right there. Belgium hasn't been created yet, I don't think, actually, but Belgium was actually part of the Netherlands at one time. And so you have the Spanish over here. Now keep in mind now, the French are sandwiched between the Spanish. The Spanish, Catholic. The French, also Catholic. Okay? But there's a reason for the French being uneasy, right? Because they're sandwiched between the two powers, and Spain is more powerful than France before the 30 Years' War. At the end of the 30 Years' War, Spain loses a lot of money and territory. France gains territory and becomes more wealthy than Spain. Huge economic and institutional shifts are happening in this 30-year period. Okay, so let's go through the phases. You want to remember BDSF. BDSF. These are the phases of the war that take us from local war to a European war. The Bohemian Phase. Bohemia is where? Anybody remember that reference that I made? Bohemia is in the Czech Republic. Bohemian. The Bohemians, now if you remember, Lutherans are allowed in the Holy Roman Empire, right? Which is our Germanic tribes and that sort of thing at this point, the Holy Roman Empire. And because Lutherans exist there in certain populations like Bohemia, they want to preserve their religion because legally they're given that right. But there is a member of the aristocracy named Ferdinand, also the name of Archduke Ferdinand, who was set off World War I with his assassination. So both names, it's handy to have both names for two different characters. But Archduke Ferdinand actually he was a prince who ruled over the small area of Bohemia, small compared to the rest of the Holy Roman Empire, for a little while. And they hated him. They just hated him. And he was no longer the prince who ruled over Bohemia, you know. And instead, he eventually became the Archduke of all of the Holy Roman Empire. He became the big dog for the entire Holy Roman Empire. Well, the Bohemians, because they hate him so much, they wanted to rebel. They were just horrified that this Catholic, Archduke would go into power. So what happens in Bohemia is there's, of course, a squabble between Protestants and Catholics. And high in a tower, in Prague, it's an event known as the Defenestration of Prague. Defenestration. And defenestration means to throw someone out the window. Fancy word for throwing someone out the window. So basically what you have is some Bohemian Protestants who are upset at these Catholic officials, and they throw them out of the window. And these Catholics should have hit the ground and died. But they didn't. They survived somehow, this great drop from a window. And it created sort of a pro-Catholic fervency, like God saved them. And so it was incentive for some Catholics to demonize the Bohemians. And of course, the Bohemians had done something horrible to the Catholics. So there are a lot of hurt feelings because of the Defenestration of Prague. But also a lot of people think a miracle occurred. A lot of sort of people had a certain amount of religious fervency on the Catholic side because they thought that they had evidence that God was in fact on their side. And you can imagine if you're part of the dominant religion and all of a sudden there's this big breakaway group and everyone's really excited about it and they just badmouth your own religion all the time. This could be something you would welcome with open arms. Is, oh, a miracle backing up your religion and, you know, saying nay to the new religion. So that was a big religious issue in Bohemia. And so what you have is the royal forces of the Holy Roman Empire basically attacking Bohemia and subduing Bohemia. So the Catholics win the first round. You're Danish. A lot of your countries in the north, you're Danish, Denmark. They were already Protestant, and they had a strong leadership. They decided to come down and help the Bohemians. So they brought their forces to subdue the Catholic forces, let's just call them. And they failed, so Catholics win again. Catholics win the second round. BDS, Swedish phase now. In Sweden, Gustavus Adolphus is your king. And he's a great military leader. He's still considered a great military leader if you're into military history at all. He's one of the first to successfully employ cannonry on wheels. So before this time, we did have cannons, but we put them on castle walls and we put them on ships. So to destroy the walls of Constantinople, the Ottoman Turks put cannons on their ships. But Gustavus Adolphus comes down and wants to take on the Catholics. He brings down his cannons. And here's something interesting. So far, it's been a Protestant versus Catholic war. France steps in. They fund the Swedes. Here's where things get weird. In the S phase, the French are giving money to the Swedes to continue their war. The French are Catholic. It's no longer a religious war in a certain light, right? So let's move ahead to the French phase. All of a sudden, somewhere in here, it's not so much about religion. So we talk about it sort of pushes the idea of the secular state and how religion really should just be private. And in France, even these days, they're the most supportive of the idea of keeping your religion private. They're the ones who outlawed burqas. They're the ones who don't want you to reveal what religion you are. It's bad taste to keep religion out of government. They're still very much like that, more than almost anyone else in Europe. And so in the French phase, the French are doing the attacking. So who do the French attack? Catholic Spain. So now it's Catholic against Catholic. So you had Protestants against Catholic, Protestant against Catholic, Protestants against Catholic, but the Protestants are supported by the French, now Catholic against Catholic. So you actually get an order away from religion, a clean staircase without missing a beat that leads to Catholic versus Catholic, France versus Spain. France, of course, wants to take more land. France, on its borders, is always contesting Alsace-Lorraine with the Germans. It wants to weaken the Spanish. By the end of the war, the Spanish are much more poor, they're drained, they're in debt. France has much more power and gained much more territory. And the economy literally shifted from a Mediterranean economy, which has existed since ancient times, to a northern-based economy. That's the second reason, aside from secularization, that this is now closer to the modern state, is that economic shift to northern Western Europe that we have today. That's when it happened. 1648 is a good time to remember, because that's when, in some ways, the remnants of the ancient world finished dying off. A lot of things from the ancient world are dying off after the Reformation. So the Peace of Westphalia was signed in 1648, and this is one of your first international delegations. We have the United Nations right now, but this is the Peace of Westphalia. Different countries throughout Europe get together, and they decide How are they going to wage peace? How are they going to divvy up the land? Who gets punished? What happens? Who goes where? So with the Peace of Westphalia, you actually have one of your first European international unions. And the comparison is the UN, right? So this is one of the first times that Europe really is getting together and creating a concert of Europe, which will be actually a key term after Napoleon, concert of Europe. And just remember that major economic shift. So there's major things going on with the 30 Years' War. How did the 30 Years' War move Europe closer to the modern state? The 30 Years' War began over one reason, but eventually took on a different character with different motives. You can talk about the difference between religion in the beginning of the war to French domination, and it had not much at all to do with religion. BDSF, the acronym. The effects of the war, you get an economic shift, shifting powers, and a movement towards secularization. The Netherlands, because major parts of it were controlled by Spain, on this last stage, the French expelled the Spanish from Spanish Netherlands. Constitutionalism versus absolutism. Bare bones, the idea of absolutism is, say, a king who has total control. One caveat is that kings have not been able to have absolute control until closer to the modern era. How weird is that? We get our most powerful kings before the whole idea of kingship disappears forever. Very fascinating time. And absolutism is embodied in the person of Louis XIV. We'll talk about him more. Constitutionalism is just that. We write a constitution. It's a written agreement. It's what this nation is built upon. It's a series of written agreements, different institutions that work together in concert without a single figurehead at the top who's making all the absolute decisions, like a king would, versus constitutionalism. Very basic. There are some early outposts of constitutionalism before constitutionalism became a big part of Western society. People drawing up constitutions like pirates. Early pirate codes are actually early sort of cultural constitutional agreements. Each ship was its own nation, essentially. You had to follow each rule or you would be, kicked off the plank or something horrible would happen. You had to follow very strict rules, and when you went out on a voyage, you had certain things you would agree to for that voyage. Freemasonry is founded on the idea of constitutionalism. If you really look into the history of Freemasonry, they are anti-monarchical. And we have two major people, Hobbes versus Locke. We'll talk about them more. Outposts of constitutionalism, the Dutch and the English. From very early on, the English has been leading the movement towards a stronger parliament and a weaker king earlier than everyone else. But outposts of absolutism, places like Austria, Russia, that sort of thing. Okay, so just so you know kind of the difference, we're really talking about kings versus constitutions.